Look, this is a session that's about an issue that's very anxiety-provoking for many of us who are engaging in overseas destinations, particularly when they're newer markets and ones where they're third world destinations where the exit processes aren't yet clear. And I'm acutely aware that many Australians are currently engaged in countries like Nepal and Mexico, where we're only just seeing the first Australian births coming home. So what we put on really at the last minute in the program is really a session with some experts who help Australians in exiting countries. Poonam Jain is based in Delhi, and she has a history of working before she did what we call CPE, Citizenship, Passports and Exit Specialisation. She worked for the US mission in India, and so has an intimate knowledge of what Western governments need when it comes to paperwork. She's been helping Australians in exiting India following births for some 3 or 4 or 5 years now, I think, and has now just started doing the same thing for Australians exiting Nepal. And so I'll be asking her some questions about the concerns parents have in that area. Roman Duana may be known to some of you. He's been a speaker at some of our other conferences. He's a registered migration advisor since 2006. He was on the New South Wales branch of the Migration Institute. He's president of the Gay and Lesbian Immigration Task Force, and his company Far and Wide Migration is based here in Sydney, and they really specialise in partner migration, child visa and employment-sponsored visas, and those having difficulties meeting migration health requirements. But as well as that, he assists a lot of parents who've got particular difficulties with citizenship by descent or child visas, particularly where one or both parents haven't got Australian citizenship and need another route to get their children home. So I'm going to talk to him a bit about that. Lily Frost has been helping Australians in Mexico, and she's sort of across the Mexico process much more than any of us are. So we'll talk to Lily a bit about that as well. Look, Poonam, I might start with you. As a general question, when Australians are thinking of engaging in a clinic, an agency overseas, should they be engaging with someone like yourself at that early stage, or what's the answer there?
Yes, I would recommend, like anybody who's engaging themselves overseas with any clinic, in the beginning they should engage themselves with the CPE specialist as well, so that they know clearly what the process is at the end. Because what they're excited about is making babies, and they don't realize what will happen once the baby is delivered. And when they come to know after the baby is delivered that this is also involved, then the stress starts, and they are not prepared for the stress. So if in the beginning you are already engaged with a specialist who will explain you what is involved in this process once the baby is born, so you're already mentally prepared that what's coming your way after the birth. And do agencies have their own exit specialists, or are they independent people? No, there are independent people. Every clinic has it, and it's for you to pick anybody, and they are available on the blogs or websites or anybody, or you can ask Sam who's good. So it's your decision who you want to pick. What sort of skills do those exit specialists have or need to have? Okay, they need to know the law of the country where the baby will be born and the law of the country where the baby will return. They should be familiar with both the laws, not just the law of the country where the baby will return, but also where the baby will be born, be it India, Nepal, Mexico, anywhere. So they should know both the countries' law. Right, right. So if we look at just India briefly, because we do have some Australians, quite a few still with births coming up in India, what's the current average time for exit process for Australians using India right now? Okay, there's not a standard timeline. Every client has different, and the documents are different, the backgrounds are different. So in general, if you would ask me, after the birth, for Australians out of India, currently will not take more than 2 to 3 weeks.
2 to 3 weeks.
Yes.
Right. 'Cause I've been hearing some couples have been there 6 weeks at least around Christmas.
It depends on the turnaround time of their DNA results as well. Because some purchase the packages where the turnaround for the DNA takes more than a week. Some purchase the package which has the expedited return of results. So it depends on a lot of things.
'Cause there's also been feedback from the Australian government that they're putting in a go slow mechanism for Australians and saying, well, don't push us, you need to allow at least 3 weeks for those processes.
Yes, they are saying that, but they're being very cooperative at the same time. And if you give them all the paperwork one time, then they're being very cooperative with the clients as well. Because they want, obviously, everybody to come home. They're not there to stop anybody.
Okay. If we turn to Nepal now, I understand we have had the first Australian births in Nepal a few weeks ago, is that right?
Yes, 2 weeks ago.
Okay. So what's the process in Nepal that people need to prepare for when it comes to the exit process? Can you walk us through that?
Okay. In Nepal, the process is mostly similar like India because there are Indian surrogates and Nepal does not allow Nepalese surrogates to be engaged in surrogacy. So they've opened a very small window for foreigners where Indian surrogates can deliver and can be engaged and the IVF can be done in Nepal. So the process, but the documents will be different, and since this is the first client, and I'm assisting this first client, and so it will take a while, but it will be a little longer than expected out of India, because India already embassy is familiar with the paperwork and everything, and they're yet to familiarize with the paperwork out of Nepal. So the paperwork, in addition, the names on the, if there is a non-heterosexual couple in Nepal who's engaging themselves in surrogacy, the surrogate mother's name will go on the birth certificate. In India, they were leaving it blank or they were writing NIL. But in Nepalese government says surrogate mother is the mother.
So will an official Nepali birth certificate be issued?
See, they're not issuing an official birth certificate. What they're doing is the hospital is issuing the birth certificate and a stamp is being put, official stamp will go on the birth certificate.
And do we know whether the Australian government will accept that?
I'm yet to submit the documents after a return.
Okay.
Yeah. But they did tell me, like, if you get us this stamp from this authority, we might accept.
So my understanding is that that documentation isn't processed in Kathmandu, it's processed in Delhi. And so do the parents need to travel down to Delhi for that part of it?
No, if you have a representative who's acting on your behalf, you do not have to travel to. Like in this case, I'm representing the client, so they don't have to travel to India. And the DNA samples will be collected in Nepal, and the costing is $40 that one has to pay to the organization whom the embassy has already selected in Nepal, and the samples will be collected by that organization. And the kits will be flown to that organization. Right,
and it's an Australian accredited doctor who collects the DNA sample in Kathmandu?
They've already identified.
Okay. Right. All right, so what are the challenges in your mind for Australians who are engaging in Nepal when it comes to exit?
See, a challenge as per exiting out of Nepal once you have the passport is okay. It's not a challenge like India, but exiting is easy. Once you have the passport and you announce it you show it to the exit office at the airport, you're okay to leave the country. But getting citizenship from New Delhi, it's quite like you have to arrange for this paperwork and everything.
Okay, okay. So what kind of things, kind of documents should Australians prepare ahead before they travel?
To Nepal?
Yes.
Yeah, they should make sure that the clinic or the agency which they're involving themselves gives you a proper stamped surrogacy agreement and the no objection certificate from the surrogate mother. The surrogate mother's ID is very important for Nepal clients. In India it wasn't important, but Nepal it is very important. And if she is married, then her husband's identity and an affidavit or a consent that he has nothing to do with this, and after delivery the baby will be given, and both of them have consented. So that document, birth certificate, discharge summaries, and obviously your personal documents showing that you're an Australian citizen and you are able to transmit your citizenship to the baby who's born overseas.
Okay, great. I'm going to ask Roman some questions in a minute about something related to that, but I might just first turn to Lily because I want us to compare the process in India, Nepal to Mexico for Australians. What's your understanding of what Australians have to do in Mexico to come home?
So And my understanding, and the way that we kind of handle things is we have an attorney who we then put in charge with the attorney from the country where the intended parents are located, and make sure that that attorney has specified exactly what documents are needed, and then we collect those. For us, though, we're able to issue a birth certificate, and the birth certificate is the official birth certificate. It's not just the one from the hospital. And with that, you also need the intended parents' apostilled birth certificates that have been officially translated into Spanish, of course.
So you'd recommend that's all done way ahead of the birth, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as, there's also several documents we need from the surrogate. So with our program specifically, before we allow a surrogate to enter our program, we require all of her documentation. And we send it over to the attorney so that he has a file for her. And then with the intended parents, we let them know before you engage with us, make sure that you can come up with your official birth certificate then and have it apostilled and officially translated. The moment a positive pregnancy test occurs, we start having intended parents gather all those documents so that once they actually come for the delivery, we're able to get that birth certificate issued right away.
And can they prepare documents, just leave out the name of the child facts on some of the documents until
Yes, exactly. So most of the documents that the Australian Embassy is going to require a specific set of documents that frankly I can't speak on because we haven't done one yet, and I'm in no way an expert on that. But in Mexico, they don't actually need to complete any of the documents ahead of time. They just need to bring their documents with them that's on our required list of documentation.
Okay, great. And my understanding is for Mexico, the processing is done not by any Australian mission in Mexico, but the Australian mission in Canada.
In Canada, yeah. So Ottawa is exactly the closest embassy where you would
And does the Australians need to actually fly to Ottawa, or do the documents just go to Ottawa?
The documents can go to Ottawa and for processing there. The issue is if a DNA test is required, and the reason why I say if is because it can change. It initially was not required for U.S., and then overnight they said we need DNA testing. So if it's required, then it has to be done through a lab that's affiliated with a Australian embassy. So there's lists of those that are available.
Okay. Another question I've got about Mexico is when a baby is born to Australians in Mexico, intending parents, does the baby automatically get Mexican citizenship passport or not?
So right now, Mexican passports are a little bit more challenging for same-sex couples. For heterosexual couples, they're issued without much concern. The reason why is because Mexico would like to issue a passport if there is a birth certificate with a man and woman's name on it. That's where they find it easier to issue. So they're more than happy to issue a passport as long as they have that birth certificate in place. There are ways to get around that if it's a same-sex couple. That way is to use the name of the surrogate mother and then have that have an agreement in place that she relinquishes all parental rights before the child's actually born. One of the things, though, that we definitely say is make sure that the agency that you're working with, whichever one it is, they prioritize the paperwork. I mean, pregnancies are important, and clinics are important and all that stuff, but the paperwork, whenever we've seen issues in Mexico, it's because documents are not completed in enough time and no attention is given to what those documents need to look like.
Yeah, okay. That's useful. Roman, can you talk us through what paperwork Australians need to prepare in terms of citizenship documents to take with them to somewhere like Mexico or Nepal or India?
Thanks, just a bit of, it's important. I look around the room and all of you have these quizzical looks. Poonam said that you need to know the law of the country you're coming from, and of course in Australia. There's one more thing that I'd like to share with you guys. You need to know that there's very important law which is called They Make It Up As They Go Along Act. You can put me on the record. I talked last year they've expanded this quite a bit, and I'm expert on that. Because as early as when I was 16, I was dealing with that. And that's why Lily said it would change. The reason for that is the requirement for Citizenship Act is quite simple. At least one parent is Australian citizen at time of birth. It's beautiful. Couldn't be any simpler than that. There's a problem, however. They would develop policy, innuendo, what's on the headline. So long as you're aware of that, then it would not be so daunting. And that's why not only do I rely on what do they want at the moment, I rely on the likes of Lily and Poonam. Don't we have excellent results? And indeed, when I get a phone call from Sam, I said, oh, it's going to be Curly. So what's the requirement? Check the information available on the website of the post, office, high commission, embassy that you are dealing with. And more importantly, sorry, Sam, I'm going ahead with it. Look, I've been working with immigration now for a while. I don't usually say good things about them. But let me tell you, for citizenship, and in our case, they're sympathetic. So they're really good. However, let's not force them to make it difficult for us. They simply just want to help us. And we know that very well and very good. And Sam and Surrogacy Australia has done a lot of work in doing that. So what we need to know are the options. It is also important to understand that when we apply for, say, citizenship by descent, it is not really their job to tell you, oh, there might be a better option. You might be able to apply for a visa if it's available. So the message really here is engage with the likes of Poonam, Lily, and myself, so you know in advance what might be required. And so you know, okay, well, I'm going to be dealing with the local office here in Nepal or in New Delhi or in Mexico, so that you could prepare in advance and so you could have backup plans. And more importantly, you are prepared to basically have some plans as to in relation to the timing and what might be the documents required, because DNA test is not required. In fact, birth certificate is not required. It is not. However, the case officer could basically insist, especially where there's a children, that there's no child trafficking. They need identification. If you look at the application form for citizenship by descent, someone has to identify the child. So that is sufficient when you come to think of it.
And on that, in the U.S. is specifically where I'm actually very skilled at it, and how it used to be is it used to just be a list of things, and you didn't need all of them, and they couldn't tell you if you needed 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 or 10, but it was up to the person you were dealing with at the moment to determine if you had what they felt like at the time you needed. And so you could be at the embassy and they would say, okay, well, I see that you have an embryo transfer report, you have a contract with your surrogate, you've got your birth certificates, you've got everything you need, but you know what? I think I'd like a DNA test. And it's like, but I mean, there's no requirement for this. And then at some point overnight they said, all right, now you need a DNA test and possibly this document, or this document. And you just never know, because it's really up to the person who you're sitting in front of to decide whether or not they're going to approve your application.
Right. Roman, if Australians are experiencing huge delays in Mexico or Nepal getting citizenship, or they think they're going to do that, are there other means of coming home with those children before citizenship or before a passport?
We are limited to a large extent to the nationality of the child at birth. Now, there are 2 general ways of determining nationality, either by by blood or soil, such as in US. Now, the issue here, if the child is stateless, then we have an issue because there wouldn't be passport, and we cannot travel without passport. So if, for example, as what we do in US...
so just talk through the US system for us so people know how that works.
That's right. So what happens is that because the child is American citizen by birth, we apply for tourist visa. Come into Australia, no questions asked. And we find it here. Now, that's rather...
Okay. So just to clarify that, so the child comes back to Australia with a US passport on a tourist visa. Once the child is home, the parents then apply for Australian citizenship and passport then, is that right?
That first citizenship and passport.
Yep.
Now, guys, we're dealing with 2 agencies here. Citizenship is administered by citizenship, border citizenship, whereas passport is administered by Passport Office, DFAT, Foreign Affairs and Trades. It's important to understand this too.
So if a heterosexual couple is engaging in Mexico and they're getting a Mexican birth certificate, they could do the same thing. Is that right?
Theoretically. But if you basically approach the embassy and say, I would like to apply for tourist visa because I want to jump the queue. I can't wait for 4 months, do you think they will give you the tourist visa? Of course they won't, because they know that you are not, the child is not a genuine tourist. Right? So what will happen is that you have no choice but to obtain for the citizenship first, and have to wait there, which is fine so long as that you're prepared to do that. So the message I would like to say here is don't just focus on citizenship, because there might be other options in US and Mexico, for example.
Yeah.
Because what could be wrong? I mean, what is the legitimate purpose of tourist visa? Tourism, visit family and friends. We're not misusing it. If you are an Australian citizen and you're bringing your child with you to show to family and friends, that is not a misuse. I mean, the child is not going to work in contravention of the visa. Right? So what we do is we manage it, we make them comfortable. Once we have identified the risk, we manage them. And I always say this to parents, practice. So don't come in with a private jet. Don't come in with Johnny Depp, because before you know it, you will have a deadline, right? So managing the risk is what's important, and knowing exactly how the bureaucrats are feeling.
Right.
And that's why Poonam is very useful for that, and Lily as well, because they know what's happening on the ground.
We had a talk about Greece before. What happens when a baby's born in Greece? What do they get citizenship of Greece? Passport for Greek citizen?
Now, I did look up quickly what's the arrangement in Greece. Unfortunately, Greece seemed to, based on my research, Wikipedia is a beautiful thing. I managed to look it up there. It's by blood. And as if you're not born to Greek parents, then I tend to agree, although I'm not expert on that. So I think the child would not be a Greek citizen. So I was excited for a moment, because Greeks could come here using electronic travel authority as well. That's what Europeans do. But my excitement is tempered by the fact that I just look it up.
Okay.
The child would not be a Greek citizen.
Okay, same as in Nepal or India.
And it's also, I mean, the U.S. and Mexico can also use the electronic transport authority to get that quick visa that you can actually acquire at the airport. One thing I do want to comment on is that I've heard a lot of people kind of throw around 4 months as the exit time for Mexico for Australians. That was one case, and granted it's been the only case, but it was also tempered by the fact that the child spent a great deal of time at the NICU. And also there was a lot of issues with determining what paperwork was actually needed and not having the paperwork required to actually get the birth certificate issued. The fact of the matter is that it's going to be very similar no matter what country you're having your baby in to get back to. It really depends on how quickly you can get that birth certificate and what that birth certificate looks like. So the 4-month thing is really should be kind of more seen as yes, it happened once and this is how long it took, but let's look at why, because the average time to exit Mexico is about 3 weeks to any other country that's actually gone through it.
Okay, thanks. We've got time for maybe a few questions. Any questions from the audience? Karen, it's got a microphone, I think, from Lovely Miss Mills.
Well, thank you. That was very informative. My question is, if there's a premature baby and the baby's in the neonatal intensive care unit, what kind of costs are the couple looking for, and what options do you offer the couples, or what assistance can you give them to pay those horrendous bills?
Are you talking to me?
All of
Any
you.
of us? Do you
I think it's more a question for you, Lily.
Okay,
probably.
I'll take it. I mean, it depends on what hospital you're working with. So there's various hospitals in Villahermosa that are able to offer top-of-the-line NICU services. Some agencies have special kind of contracts negotiated for a specific daily rate for NICU. There is insurance available, especially if you were, for example, to get a Mexican passport with the Mexican birth certificate with the surrogate's name, and your agency has insured the surrogate. That insurance actually goes on to the child as well. So that's one option to deal with it. There is a very expensive, and I know there was a media kind of thing recently with a couple who was paying like $5,000 a day for their twins.
In Mexico?
In Mexico. And the reason for that is because there's a hospital down there that all the surrogacy cases were going through. And the hospital was like, oh, there's not really insurance, nobody's using it, so we can charge whatever we want to charge because they're going to have to pay it because you can't, exit a country if you have outstanding medical bills, which granted is the same with the U.S. or any other place that you go. There is a hospital there that has a pre-negotiated rate of $200 a day as opposed to the $5,000. So it just kind of depends on doing your research ahead of time, making sure that you're working with someone who's knowledgeable, and making that decision. Do you want to have the surrogate's name on the birth certificate for intention of using her insurance in case that's a large concern for you?
Okay, but that's a little incorrect, Lily. You're allowed to leave the United States even if you have medical bills. There has never been a case of someone being arrested because you broke
Certainly
your
not
foot when you were in
arrested.
hospital.
Yeah, certainly
You
not
can leave the
arrested.
country.
However, getting things like passports issued, a lot of times for surrogacy cases.
I have never heard of that.
I have. I've had cases
Okay,
like that where that's
34
happened.
years and I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, I mean, it's a thing. I mean, I always have to present the hospital bills to the U.S. Embassy or to the China Embassy, for example, when I'm getting people exited from there.
One last question, maybe. Up there, Kate Bourne. There's a microphone for Kate. Aussie.
Roman, last year I listened with great interest to your session, and you mentioned a really difficult scenario where the DNA testing has come back and there was no connection between the baby and the intended parents. And then I've heard of other scenarios where that's happened. Could you comment about that?
My job when this happens is to gently remind the decision maker that they cannot simply refuse an application on the basis of DNA mismatch. Why? Because parent-child relationship is not only to be determined by genetic link, we all know that. So what we try to do if there is such an issue is to basically explain to them that maybe by intent or legal as well. So can I just relate that to what Lily said? The issue here is that different posts do settle in. I mean, I do expect that Mexico, they would get quicker with this. Mm-hmm. Keep in mind that they just want to help, except that, they're trying to make it up as they go along. So they would get quicker. The issue sometimes is that after they settled into their own mode, such as in India, where DNA is the only way to do it because there's no court documentation, sometimes they forget that there's no legislative basis to mandate that DNA is the only way to do it. So in that case, Poonam, we simply say, look, there's no legislative requirement for DNA test. It's still a father because of the intent, very clear that for all purposes, this child is meant to be the of the commissioning parent.
So just to clarify, Roman, you're saying so there are children who've come home to Australia despite a DNA mismatch?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Yes. Well, that's right. So not the intended one, but in terms of the process. They started the process. There's a mismatch in terms of laboratory, but it's still the intending parent. And there's still a consent from the surrogate. And of course, the consent from the father or the parent that, well, this is our child for all purposes. And if that happens too, if someone is left in a home country, I would like to know, because we could actually get the citizenship for the child with or without the consent of the parent, except we have to wait until they are 18. And that could happen. And hopefully we don't have to do that, because these children would be born through our decision and not their decision. The thought that someone would be left in an orphanage confronts my decency. And I think I'd like to simply say it's same but different. Just be comfortable about that, guys, and know the risk and get advice. And that's why Lily is very useful in Poonam in doing that.
Thanks.
Okay, just one last question.
Roman, is there an opportunity to talk to you, like if we decide to go ahead with the processes, is there an opportunity to talk to you directly, or do we have to go through our own means?
Actually, that's a good point, because Roman and I have discussed one of the benefits we've decided to do for people who are Surrogacy Australia members is to give them access to, I think it's a free consultation for you, Roman, as an initial, is it half hour, an hour or something?
Well, however long it takes for you to understand what the requirements are. I do this. And I don't watch, I like this, but why do I do that? Is that I learn from all of you, because they make it up as they go along, remember?
Yeah.
So the only requirement, it may well be that the result of that discussion, you don't need me. And indeed, most parents have done it themselves. it's already complicated without my help.
Yeah.
So the only requirement that I would ask if you are a financial member of Surrogacy Australia is you tell me how it went, because that really enhanced my learning. So yes, absolutely.
I think for others who aren't financial members of Surrogacy Australia, I think it's about $400 an hour or something, is it, for a consult?
That is right, because I'm expensive, but let's support the organisation that support us. So if you're a financial member of Surrogacy Australia, with that evidence, happy to see you. I'm Sydney based.
Okay. Well, I think we've got to go to lunch now, but thanks everybody for coming. Thanks to the panel too.
Thanks.